Good morning. Well, actually, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
My name is Sarah, and I work with the Living Archives Project. Today is February 10th, 2023, and this week there were 193 reported cases of COVID-19 in the Charlotte-Mecklenburg County area, which actually shows a decrease of 16% over the last 2 weeks. Therefore, each subject is comfortable not wearing a mask today. LaDarius, would you introduce yourself?
Absolutely. So good afternoon. My name is Dr. LaDarius Thompson, and I serve as a university administrator currently at Queen's University of Charlotte. I'm currently wearing today a red, white, and blue or patriotic paisley shirt with a red Lego heart. Also identify as African American, bald with gold rimmed glasses.
Awesome, thank you. Chris, would you introduce yourself?
Yes, my name is Christopher Lacy. I'm a district office employee in school support for Charlotte-Mecklenburg schools. I am an African-American male, short-cut hair, wearing glasses and a beard with a navy blue polo on.
I love it. Thank you both so much. So you both are you both work in education, just different age groups.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yep.
And are you both from Charlotte?
No. So I'm from the Charlotte area. I'm from Monroe.
Okay.
I was born and raised in Monroe. For most of my life, my dad worked in Charlotte. So I've been around and in Charlotte all my life, just not really from here, but 30 minutes down the road.
Okay, awesome.
Yeah.
How about you, LaDarius?
So I'm originally from a small town called Anderson, South Carolina, but I've been fortunate that I've lived in 5 other states since then, and so I most recently moved here from Richmond, Virginia, and I've been in the Charlotte area for about a year and a half at this point.
Awesome. Okay, I love it. And so, tell me, what kind of brought you to Charlotte?
So, for me, the answer was pretty simple. What brought me to Charlotte was that I fell in love with my amazing husband. And so after trying to chase him down for 6 years, I decided when the opportunity presented itself that I was not going to lose it this time. And so when he said yes, I said, okay, I'm going to do everything I can in my power to get down here. And I think it took us, maybe 4 to 6 months to find something.
Yeah, about 4 to 6 months.
And then I was down here.
Yeah.
Amazing. Wow. So, first off, congratulations on your recent marriage.
Thank you.
It's amazing. So excited for you both.
Thank you.
And so how does that make you feel, Chris, that LaDarius he moved here for you?
It makes me feel like, I say it this way, I don't know if it's a weird way to describe it, but I feel like honored. You know, I feel like honored. I feel blessed. I'm super grateful that he was willing to make that kind of sacrifice.
Yeah.
So it just makes me feel like, full, you know, like that's a word, like I grew up in church and that's a word people say it all the time, but I know what it's like to feel like full, like honored, full, and like enwrapped in like love and support. So, yeah.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah.
Love that. That's a great response. So tell me a little bit about, if you can both think about the last 3 years of your life. What did that look like? Because one, I know LaDarius moved down here in that time frame. You guys got married in that time frame.
Yeah.
But there was also some other major changes in your lives. Will you guys share, and whoever wants to go first?
Yeah. Sure. Life has been like dynamic over I think it's the best way to describe it. Incredibly dynamic. The world has changed. The world is different. I've changed. So I've changed jobs in that time. I've moved districts. LaDarius has moved here. It's just been for lack of a better descriptor, unprecedented. It's been, life like I didn't know would be or have seen. So yeah. Like to think, I don't know that I've really reflected about it until this moment about how just transition field the past 2-3 years have been. Yeah. So
how about you, LaDarius?
I would say the same thing. It's really been impactful, but like a whirlwind at the same time.
Yeah.
So, as Chris mentioned, we were all navigating a lot during that time. But specifically for me, I was finishing my dissertation and finishing my doctoral degree at the beginning of COVID, which I don't recommend doing that because it was a nightmare trying to wrap up my degree on my couch. I mean, essentially we stopped all classes, all research stopped, everything halted, and here I was literally when the pandemic happened. I was 3 months away from graduation, and so it was this kind of mass panic of like, how do I wrap up my dissertation while on my couch in my PJs? And so I was dealing with that while navigating the job that shifted during the pandemic. And so during the pandemic, I worked at Virginia Commonwealth University, where I started off as the student government advisor, and then transitioned to oversee all clubs and organizations on campus, which was about 600 organizations. And then during the pandemic, I got switched over to our fraternity and sorority life office, where I became the director of fraternity and sorority life 2 months into the pandemic. And so I was dealing with that while dealing with my dissertation and everything else that was happening all at the same time. And working with a community of students who had kind of been ignored for about a year. And here we were navigating this pandemic, and I was the new administrator coming in trying to tell them what to do. And so that was a whirlwind as well too. And unfortunately, we dealt with a lot of sticky situations in that particular job, and we also dealt with university tragedy during that time as well too. So the pandemic was a lot, and so navigating all of that while also during that summer was when we had the opportunity to reconnect, and so trying to balance relationships and work and school during the pandemic was intense. It was very intense. And so through that 2-3 year cycle, I finished my degree. I changed jobs 3 times really. I changed twice in Richmond and then came down here. I moved. I dealt with my family issues during the pandemic. We lost a couple of family members, around 3 family members during the pandemic. My parents divorced during the pandemic as well too. So it was a lot happening.
Wow.
Yeah.
And then he got here and we moved again. And then we got
here,
married,
moved, and
bought a house. It was a lot of things happening.
So when
much.
I think back on the last 2 to 3 years, it was truly a blur, but a blessing, but a blur at the same time. Yeah, it was great.
Well, I'm so sorry to hear about all the losses that you've encountered these last few years with your family, and the tragedy at the school, and anything else that you encountered. I truly am sorry.
Thank you.
It also shows how resilient and strong you are to be who you are, and to transition to a new state, to a new city, to a new university, and all of that, and just be incredible. So truly goes to show how strong you are, LaDarius. So with that, I'm going to come back to your roles as teacher and administrator in the university, but we did this activity together before the interview called a hand map. Is there anything from the hand map that you would like to share with us? And if not, that's totally fine.
I think one thing I would share from the hand map that I even caught myself off guard is in one of the hand lines talking about intersectionality. And I think that was one of the journeys that you asked us to write about. And I don't think that I quite, until today, really took the time to reflect on how much intersectionality meant to me navigating the pandemic, because during the pandemic was also the summer of social justice, as I call it, the summer of 2020, and Richmond, for lack of better terms, I felt like kind of the epicenter of the social justice uprising, especially for the South, and I lived like 2 blocks away from a lot of the Confederate statues that were being removed in the city, and so it was really crucial for me during the pandemic to really understand what my identities were and how they intersected, and how I could begin to advocate and fight for what I needed as an individual to be successful in our society. And so when I wrote that down, I was like, wow, I never have taken a moment to really stop and think about how all of my identities were impacted during that time. But most importantly, thinking about that summer of really just kind of stepping back and taking an opportunity to understand myself and all the identities that make me. So as I continue to navigate the world, I know who I am walking holistically, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
There wasn't much I was going to share. The first thing that came to my mind was on one of my fingers. I was describing myself as an educator. Just like coming a few months ago, a teacher friend of mine and I had a conversation about how being an educator impacts the entirety of your life, especially when you walk in and live it the way we do. And so I'm like been thinking about and realizing like I enter all my spaces as an educator. So like in relationships and family relationships, personal relationships, relationships with my friends, just like being an educator in whole and the way I see the world through the lens of an educator impacts me greatly. And also I'm really, really proud to say that I was a public school teacher. I was an assistant principal. I worked in a district office. So like I'm an educator through and through. I come from educators, and that's how I enter most spaces, like with those skills. So yeah, that's all I'm saying.
So thanks for sharing.
Yeah.
So with that, as
Yeah.
an educator,
Yeah.
tell us about that. Did you transition from being a public school teacher to an assistant principal during the last few years?
No, so I transitioned from an assistant principal to being working in a district office position in the past few years. So when the pandemic shutdown first happened in 2020, I was an assistant principal at a middle school. And it was so strange. So in my district at the time, we actually closed because so what happened was our school school district was closed for about 2 days because the local water supply had the E. coli levels had risen too high. So they were like, school's closed until the E. coli levels level out. And so it wasn't crazy high, but it was too high to be drinking the water, right? So school was closed for 2 days, and the local city and county water people were working on the water levels, monitoring the water levels. We were set to come back to school on that Monday. So that was like a Thursday, Friday situation. We came back to school on Monday, and we had a staff meeting, and our principal at the time was like, everyone get all your things. We're going to be home for at least 2 weeks. Wow. So the state had decided school will be closed for 2 weeks. So teachers were packing up things. I packed up my computer. So as an assistant principal, I was like an essential worker at the time. So we were still going to the building like on a rotation. So I was going 2 or 3 times a week. But everybody just went home. And we're trying to figure out what school was going to look like. And we didn't come back until August. And so that was in March. And we didn't come back until August. So then we came back to school and we tried to figure that out. We had a whole year trying to figure out what that was like. And I think, honestly, this may be off topic, but that was the most... Coming back to school after we had been home for so long was the strangest part. We had to get used to doing school 6 feet away. Our teachers are close to their students. I remember it took us weeks in our school to get used to what it was like to interact with students and not be able to see their faces. It was strange. You couldn't see their smiles. You couldn't see their frowns. Yeah. If they were upset, you couldn't listen to them read. You couldn't that level of interpersonal interaction was seemingly disappeared. And it was weird. That on top of we were rotating in classes, so there were only maybe 6 or 7 kids in a class every day, and they couldn't get near each other. So the interpersonal interaction of what you feel when you get to look at someone's face was gone. Mm-hmm. The interpersonal interaction of what you do when you have a conversation with the student about what they're learning is gone. The interpersonal interactions of when students work together in a small group and collaborate and build that camaraderie is gone. But also, and not to add another layer, but also all at the beginning of the school year, when all the focus and everything we do is built around building community and building the ways that we work together in the school. That was the strangest part of all. Figuring out or navigating like in school we rely so much on interpersonal relationships and interactions for all those levels to be gone. That was strange. It was like there was a lot of joy missing from what was fun on a day-to-day basis. So yeah, that was
connection piece.
yes, that was weirder than closing. Like, fine, we'll be closed. We're out for the summer. I mean, why we don't have to do the ELGs this year. No standardized tests. Oh, good, that's good. Everyone gets a break.
Yeah.
But to come back in a world with that, come back in a world where you interact with people less was weird,
Yeah.
strange. So
How did you find that teachers and students responded during that time?
Students, everyone was frustrated. Everyone was upset. Like we're navigating like getting used to like online learning platforms, which I was in middle school, so we were used to that, but not at the level that we needed to be. So kids were frustrated. Parents were frustrated because they didn't know how to access the learning either. Teachers were frustrated because they're just trying to figure out a teaching style that works for them. Because what it felt like to teachers, no matter your experience level, no one had taught school like this before. There were a few people who teach in like virtual public schools and things like that, but that wasn't anywhere as big as it was before. So every teacher of every experience level was brand new to the game. And in education, we leverage experience a lot. We leverage the experience of having interacted with students in this way year after year after year.
Yeah.
That rug was ripped from under the teachers. So teachers are frustrated. They didn't know what to do. Parents are frustrated. The students are frustrated on top of like losing engagement because of because of having to be home some days, but come to school some days. And adolescents already don't come to school or do their work. So for the most part. So everyone just seemed really confused and upset.
I can imagine. I
All
mean,
the
middle
time.
school's always a hard school
Yes.
to like a hard
Yes.
time frame to handle.
Yes.
And on top of that, all of these changes and
Yes.
transitions, I can imagine.
And I can't imagine what it was like, because I spent a little bit of time as administrator in high school. I can't imagine what it was like for students who were trying to figure out how to go to college. And so I taught elementary school too. So I can't imagine what it was like for a child to not know how to read or be taught to read for 3 years. If something I thought about that August, something I thought about all fall was about how many senior and junior athletes needed that season to pay for their college experience and did not get that.
I never thought about that.
You know,
but yes.
it was just strange.
Wow, yeah.
Yeah, just weird, if that makes sense.
No, totally.
Yeah.
Totally. Did you find that, especially with students, I know as I've gotten to talk to a few different parents, the social interaction part really changed. Like students at that age, they just didn't know how to interact or struggle because of that interference.
Yeah.
Like, did you notice that?
They
as
didn't know
well?
how to interact with each other, and they didn't know how to come to school. Like, people take for granted that you have to learn how to go to school.
Yeah.
You have to learn how to be successful in those environments and constraints. They didn't know how to do that. Students didn't know how to, like, their ability and they're apt to engage in any kind of academic conversation was through the floor. It was just because the basis of academic conversation is like engagement, right? They haven't been able to engage with each other, have social conversation, let alone have an academic conversation. They weren't able to sit beside each other in lunch and talk about what happened to them last night. So why would they talk about Martin Luther King's autobiography?
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
Totally.
It was like reimagining all the things that we felt like students got in school that trying to create experience for them that gave them the same things, but it's not the same.
Yeah.
A part of me wonders how much of that is okay because the world is changing, and a part of me wonders how much of it was missed opportunity. I don't know.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
Yeah, it does.
Yeah.
It really does. And with that, LaDarius, you being a college administrator and working with college students during that time, did you find similarities to what Chris is talking about, or just was it vastly different?
I think there were lots of similarities in that area, especially as you talked about getting them engaged and ready for their next academic challenge. I felt like we saw a lot of that with incoming students during the pandemic because we noticed that their academic skill sets were different. Some of them were just not there because they hadn't been dealing with it for about a year. And so I remember distinctly as we got ready for our first freshman orientation during the pandemic, it was this mass panic of, well, how do we orientate 1,400 students at one time and get them ready? And it became this like mass panic of, well, do we have the software? Do we have this massive Zoom room? Like, what do we end up doing? And it ended up being like departments kind of took clumps of students and we tried to orient them, but that was hard because I was in an engagement area and I didn't know the academic side that well. And so trying to get them ready, I felt like put them at a disadvantage because here I was panicking trying to do my job, and now you're adding on extra stuff to my plate to make sure that students feel welcome and have a sense of belonging to the institution. Like I said, which was hard because we all were panicking at the same time. And so I distinctly remember during that time while we were getting freshman students or incoming students ready for orientation at the same time during the pandemic, we were kicking out on-campus students, trying to make space in housing because we were like, well, you're too close together. We can't keep you on campus because we can't guarantee you that there's safety protocol in place. And so it was like 1 hour I'm picking up the phone and calling somebody, getting them to orientation, and the next hour I'm calling somebody and telling them to get out of the rest halls because you got to go home.
Wow.
And so it was a lot of emotional roller coasters during the pandemic of trying to get them ready. But I really felt for the incoming students because I felt like they came in at such a disadvantage. I mean, in my last institution, we were a huge urban metropolitan campus with 32,000 students. And here we were bringing in this brand new freshman class of almost 3,000 students and telling them to stay in your room for the entire first year that you're here. And on the flip side of that, we were being told make sure that they are engaged, they have a sense of belonging, they are being entertained and staying out of trouble in their room through a screen. And so, you know, here it was for me in my professional career, I spent the last decade of doing student events, and that ranged from leadership development opportunities through concerts, through travel. I mean, there were so many other things, and here we were now being told to put all of that through a screen. And it was it was jolting because it's like, how do you do that? How do you build those connections? And I think it might have been different if I was probably at my current institution where it was a little bit smaller. You could do that. But trying to, you know, I remember my very first chapter meeting, coming in and meeting with the chapters to say, hey, I'm here, I'm your new campus administrator, and there were 3,000 students in that Zoom room. And I remember like getting and turning on that camera, and I panicked because I was like, I'm 3,000 people in this room. I have no clue what's going on. And so trying to have conversations with them while they're still nervous and panicky at the same time, and they have thousands of questions. And that was also the time around Zoom bombing and all of those things that were happening. And so my very first meeting, I had our university president there. We were there with 3,000 students, and I didn't know about all the Zoom security protocols at that time because, you know, we had been using the technology, but it was for small meetings here and there. I mean, nothing as massive as that. And someone took over the screen, and I remember seeing Nazi come across the screen and the N-word. And then it went to porn, and I remember like panicking because I was like, the president's right there. My supervisor's right there. There's 3,000 students in this room.
Oh my goodness.
And I didn't know what to do. And so I remember that particular one, I ended the meeting because I was like, I don't know what else to do. And then we had like this panic call with IT, and they made us bring everybody back. And institute all of these security protocols, but it was one of those where, and the first time in my career as an educator, I was like, I don't know what we're doing. Like, I don't know what to do. I don't know how to navigate this. And, and it was, it was like a mind melt of like, I don't know what to do.
No, seriously, not knowing what to do. Like in school, if like I remember being a teacher and a beginning administrator before in school, it was okay not to know what to do because there was someone there who had done it before, and the school ain't changed in a long time. So there was always a procedure, a routine, a lesson, an activity, a worksheet, a computer game, a program. There was always something before, and then there came this time when there was nothing before. There was nothing to know what to do.
Yeah,
it was
similar.
weird.
Yeah. We had this. I came from a culture where if we didn't know what we were doing, we had plenty of colleagues to tag and say, help us with this, or what are some of the things that we need to talk about. But in this particular moment, here I was as a director, standing in my living room pacing because I was like, who do I call? Who do I talk to figure this out? And I'm like, wait, but I'm the one in charge. So it's like, what do I do? And it was just one of those where I'm pretty sure like the first 2 months of the pandemic, I think I cried every day of just trying to figure out what the hell are we doing? And it was a lot of pressure from senior administrators to keep the students engaged, keep them active, make sure that they stay out of trouble. And it's like, well, what about us at the same time? Like, you're putting all this pressure on us. We are navigating the pandemic just like the rest of this country. But yet you want us to show up and work. And I mean, we went from already long work days. So I remember it was like 12 plus hour work days of just, I would get on 7 o'clock a.m. Zoom calls all the way until 8 p.m. And then I might get summoned for a 9 o'clock Zoom. And it just, it felt like all the boundaries that were there to protect us as educators has disappeared.
And to something you said a second ago, like you said 3,000 students, and for mine it was 1,400 kids and their parents. I feel like from the top and from the bottom and from the side, everyone was looking at you, and then they were especially looking at their teachers. In my experience, to manifest the same outcomes of engagement and learning in a completely different time, in a completely different modality, in a completely different way of engagement. But still, from the top, students and parents have to be engaged and communicated with. From the bottom, I want my child to communicate and engage with, and I want this educational outcome but with none of the structures that we had before. It was like it was a very pressurizing dynamic.
Yes.
If that makes sense.
Yeah.
Very pressure. Because I distinctly remember when we did our first recruitment during that particular season, it was Panhellenic sorority recruitment. And and we had 579 women that signed up to participate in recruitment. And traditionally, recruitment was this 3-day in-person, high energy kind of weekend. And here I was told to make everything happen on Zoom. And I was like, well, how do you create this experience on Zoom? And here I was coming in as a queer Black man into an experience that is traditionally for heterosexual white women. And so, again, it was another moment of panic because it was like, well, how do I create this experience for this particular group through a screen, and making sure that they get everything that they want, making sure that there's equity in the process, that all the chapters get time to share their work. And I remember finding myself being this like wizard behind the scenes on the Zoom trying to move all these pieces around to create this experience. And I remember thinking to myself, like, what are we doing? Like, what is happening? Because this is not something I thought I never would do as an educator. I always envisioned myself being with students, helping them develop and learn and navigate their ways. And here I was just being a wizard behind the curtain, moving people from Zoom rooms to Zoom rooms and trying to make sure that chats were safe and okay. And if this person, was having a panic attack over here in this room, that I could get over here while also dealing with everything else. And I remember saying to my supervisor at the time through the camera that I was like, this is not working. Like, this is not, like, I am going stir crazy sitting in my apartment trying to create experiences for 3,000 students, and I'm like, it's not working. And I'm also freaking out myself because it's like I'm a student. I'm a new administrator trying to run this newly built office that had been empty for 2 years, and so I was like, I don't think this is for me. Like,
The pressure.
yeah, the pressure. It was
Oh
super
my
intense,
gosh.
and I remember it only got worse. Like it never stopped. And I think the culminating piece for me was when we unfortunately had our student tragedy, where a student passed away from a hazing incident.
Oh my
It was one of those moments where I was like, I don't think this is my calling anymore, because it added the pressure and it made it tenfold. And so all the meetings that we were still having from 12 to 10, they just went from, or 7 to 10, they just went from 7 to midnight, or 7 to 2 a.m. Because we were all trying to figure out how this tragedy happened through the screens. And it was like, well, one, this tragedy didn't happen through the screen. And so we're trying to solve it through a screen, and that's not how it's going to work. And then plus it was a lot of political players at play, with it being a larger institution, and it was all about, well, who do we blame? Who do we tell the news it's their fault? And keep it moving, and, worry about everything else. And I remember sitting through all those meetings, and this particular meeting was at a Saturday night at 10 o'clock at night, sitting there thinking, I don't want to do this anymore. Like, I do not want to do this anymore, because we have sat here at 10 o'clock on a Saturday night for 2 hours and talked about everything but the students. It was, who do we blame? Who's talked to the police? Who's talked to the attorneys? And that was the moment that I was like, I don't do this anymore. Because I was like, we have stopped caring about the students. And through the pandemic, being in these high pressure environments, I realized the institution stopped caring about us. As the staff and the administration and the faculty. And it all became about, let's keep the students so we can keep their dollars. And when I saw that beginning to happen, I was like, I don't think this is my calling anymore.
It's impossible for the machine to care about the cog. It's impossible. That's the machine can only care about the outputs and the inputs, never about the cog and the wheel.
And here I was, this person who'd been put in this position to, create these experiences, but also tell people they needed to get out of their housing. And those were hard phone calls too, because people were like, well, where do I go? And it's like, hopefully home, if your home situation is safe enough for you to go
or
back,
secure enough.
or secure. But if that's not the case, I unfortunately am sorry. I was given this Excel sheet of 100 students to call and the script to read, and nowhere in these resources did it say what to do if you don't feel safe going back home.
Which is another thing that no one ever talked about when we decided that school had to be closed. Are we sending children? In my case, are we sending children into places that are secure, that are safe, where they're going to be fed, and where they're not going to be harmed? And unfortunately, the answer to those questions is not always yes. There are it's a really, really interesting thing. And I hate this part because I don't like to talk about it. I never cry about anything, but it was very interesting to know that you were sending children home to be abused and hungry. That was really weird and really strange. Sorry, I really don't ever cry about anything. But it was really weird, really strange, and really painful to know. And we had a very large school. It was like 14. We had a big middle school, 1,400 kids. But for the 5 kids who went home to insecurity, that was really, no one, like our counselors thought about it, but no one at large wondered if they were okay. And that was hard. Really, really, really hard. Anyway, I apologize. But it's fine. It's okay. Yeah, sorry. No.
As someone who, just to let you know, before this job, I was a therapist with foster kids who were abused. And so I cannot tell you, Chris, how deeply it impacts you.
Yeah.
When a child is sent home to an unsafe and maybe unfed home, and maybe both, if not. And so I can imagine what that's like, and that pressure you feel because you care so much.
I remember feeling the same way. And I remember eventually I only did those phone calls for half a day because I was signed up for a 6-hour shift. And I remember 2 hours to that shift, I went back to my supervisor and was like, you do this. Because
Yeah.
I was like, I can't continue to call these kids and tell them to get out of housing they've already paid
Right.
for, and then tell them to go God knows where, but you can't stay here. And I was like, what kind of message does that send to our community about
Right.
how we care?
Right.
And I was like, during that time, we kicked out 600 students.
Wow.
600 students out of the rest hall, because we happened to be on spring break when the pandemic came along. And so our campus was already kind of sparse
Yeah.
at the time.
Yeah.
And then it became this mass panic of, well, we need to get everybody else out, before things get worse. And similarly, I don't think anyone ever stopped to have the conversation to say, well, where are these students where are they going to go? Because if they are already here during spring break, which is the opportunity that most take to go back home or to meet with loved ones, and they stayed, that should be a clear sign that something that's going on in their home environment that we're not making any better by telling them to get out.
And were there, I'm just thinking too, what if you had international students?
Right.
Yeah.
Whose family lived abroad.
We did.
And those students, they didn't get any resources from the university.
Some of them got meal stipends. Some of them, depending on where home was, were able to stay through like some of the campus apartments, and then some of the faculty stepped up to volunteer. But a good portion of them, unfortunately, they had to be sent to shelters. And other places throughout the city because the university was like, we don't have the capacity to keep you here. And so that was tricky.
And to be, I can't imagine what it's like to be 19 and to be halfway across the world, and then say, well, you now have to go live in a shelter for people who are housing insecure.
Yeah.
Like, I cannot imagine what that is like.
And to have nobody.
Yeah, to have nobody. Except this random person who was calling you and reading this fabricated script that.
And I can imagine the responses you were getting.
Oh,
These
yeah,
students are probably frustrated.
It was
angry and hurt.
Yes, it
and
was
they're
tears
taking it out on
and
you.
yelling and everything else, and I remember just kind of sitting there and taking it because I was like, we as the institution deserve it. I don't deserve it, but like I am the institution calling you at that time. And so I remember for a lot of students, I was just like, say what you need to say.
Yeah.
Like it's not gonna hurt my feelings. Like I get it. Like I completely get it.
Yeah.
And it was challenging because similar to everybody else being sent home, the staff that were identified as essential workers were required to stay on campus. And so, I went home initially those first few weeks in March, and then by May 1st, we were told to be back in the office. And so from May on, I sat in my office with the door closed for the rest of the pandemic, just doing work because we were told we had to be there. And so, that was the other part, is making those calls while, sitting here in this well-protected, ventilated office and telling other people, get out onto the streets or else. Like, I'm going to send campus police after you, which I never called campus police on anybody. But like I said, 2 hours within that, I took it back to my supervisor. Like, I refuse to do this. Like, I can't be the person to call them and tell them to get out and not have any other recourse for them, as we're all panicking and trying to figure this all out.
How long were, in both of your cases, how long were the students at home?
So for us, we left I think it was towards the end of March. The students came back to school in August, but it was part-time. Well, partial of the time. So every student came to school once a week. So we had 4 different cohorts of students that came in Monday through Thursday. And this isn't in Charlotte. This is not in the CMS district. This is another district. In CMS, they were just home until February. I think it was February of 21.
Yeah, I think
They
it was
were,
a while.
and then they started in on having several different cohorts come throughout the week. In the district I was in, students came once a week up until I think it was January, when we then start coming twice a week. And around February or March, when Charlotte-Mecklenburg School started with like partial cohorts going in school in the upper grades, we started with everyone coming back to school.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So up until probably second semester of 2021.
Yeah.
Yeah, 21.
Spring semester.
Spring semester, they started coming back to school full time.
Okay. Interesting. And how about you with it?
It was similar. So, like I mentioned, we were on spring break, and so
Yeah.
essentially nobody came back after spring break. And we didn't come back until kind of mid-August, but then it depended on your classification, your major, and your program as to when you came back. Because the challenge to that particular institution is that we had a medical campus that had a nursing school, medical school, dentistry, pharmacy, nursing, all the things. They never shut down. And so it was trying to figure out, well, how do we keep the medical campus students safe and in their programs while also getting what we call the academic campus back and acclimated. And so it ended up being this kind of system to where the medical students came back, they were there for 2 weeks, we watched and we monitored, and nothing happened. Then we brought in another group of the first years, same process, watched them for 2 weeks, and nothing happened, we brought in another group. But I mean, really, I'm not sure why we brought them back, because we brought them to sit in their rooms the whole time. And so all classes were virtual, nothing was really happening in person. We were still told to operate virtually, although we were forced to be on campus. And so a lot of them, I think they came, but then shortly left right afterwards, because they were like, what's the point of coming to sit in this room the entire time? And plus, the university at the time had very strict protocols about you had to have been mandated, you had to take these daily check-in tests, and if you didn't do that, then you were either fined or potentially kicked out of school. And so it was kind of a hot mess when we came back. And I honestly think, because we were so big, there was just no way to control everything that was happening and to get people back in a timely and safe manner as well too.
So we talked a lot about your professional life and how you were impacted. Let's talk about your personal lives.
Okay.
Because I bet that your professional life also fed into the struggles that you faced personally too, especially as you talked about the pressure and the struggles, and that all affects every part of your life. And for you, like having to take Zoom meetings until midnight, I mean, how did you guys handle, and what was it like the last 2 years for you personally?
So there is a small part of it that is okay, like, but just because of like my work style. Like there were lots of times when it was very nice to go to work and be distracted, right? Even at a time when no one was coming to school, when we had to be there in the building and sit on Zooms and fill in spreadsheets of people you talk to. Sometimes to be able to do that, especially in the beginning, was really, really, really nice. I didn't have to think about everything else. I could just go and type in my spreadsheet or look at all my teachers' Canvas course for the second time today. Make sure everyone was on their live. Like I could go down the list and see who was updating their Canvas page versus be engaged in everything else that was going on. So sometimes that was really, really nice. But also it became a problem because work never ended. Like the time stayed the same, but the amount of time stays the same in a day, but the time dedicated to work just grew and grew and grew and grew. And a part of it, and I didn't feel bad about it, I was like, well, I'm not going anywhere. I don't have anything else to do, so I guess I'll just open up the computer and work into the late evening, into the late night, or if I couldn't sleep, or, well, might as well do some work. It's okay. And so you plug away and chunk away. And so it became like a whole thing of just working nonstop. Nonstop. Especially for the first like 4 or 5 months up until the close of that school year. That's all it was. Nonstop. Go. Wow. But it felt okay. At the time, because it was like, what else am I gonna do? So
work kind of became your sole identity in a way of day in and day out, daily tasks. It was work.
Yeah, everything was work.
Yeah.
Work. On Sundays, my parents only live like 30 minutes away. So on Sundays, I go see them. But outside that, it was just work. My mom was just work. That's just what we did. Yeah. Just worked. So.
Yeah, I would say it was the same for me. I mean, it was work while also mixed in with being in school at the same time. And all of this was at the same institution. So I remember at one point during the pandemic, like thinking, I remember like seeing the school name in my sleep because everything that I was doing was around this institution. And if I wasn't doing my career stuff, then I was doing my dissertation stuff. And so I remember like during the beginning of the pandemic, I wanted nothing to do with the institution because I was like, it's everywhere. And I felt like it probably had a tremendous impact on my mental health at the time too, because I was out of states and my family was in South Carolina, and so I didn't have the opportunity to come down. And my mom is a breast cancer survivor, and so I didn't want to do anything to jeopardize her health at the time because we just didn't know what it was. So I spent pretty much the whole entire pandemic in my apartment by myself in Richmond. And it was, I'm thankful that I had my COVID bubble back at the time that we were doing those to help me navigate it and find spaces out. But it was very challenging being there and navigating that all by myself. I remember my birthday was in April, right after when the pandemic started, and I remember thinking like, that was the first birthday that I spent truly by myself and I honestly thought the world was in like, I mean, I think around my birthday, because we didn't have answers and we didn't know what was going on, a part of me switched into this doom and gloom kind of mode that I was just like, well, we don't survive this, and I guess, you know, I'll just try this and I'll try that. And I had to remember to tell myself to not think that way, because I remember at one point, like I was watching the news 24/7. Like my TV was just on, and it was just the news and all these COVID specials and here's the new numbers. And I remember at one point I told myself I had to stop doing that because it was damaging, and I was already very sensitive. And I think I was dealing with mental health prior to the pandemic, but it just amplified it even more. And then when I started to get into the doom and gloom phase, I was like, and the doom trolling. I remember at one point I was on Twitter following all the social justice stuff and was looking at all these videos of shootings and all these other things. And I remember telling myself, I was like, this is not healthy.
And that was a whole nother thing. The news cycles around all the killings of Black men and women, one, you're in your house all the time, but also everything you see, every current event you read is about the death of a Black person. That was trippy is the only way I can describe it, because so it's either I'm going to stare at my computer or work, or I'm going to go read about the death of this Black man or woman. Which one am I going to do today? And when I finish this one, I'm probably just going to go to the other one and then go to sleep and wake up and bounce back and forth between those two things for a while. That was a hard space to live in, a very hard space to live in.
Yeah, because I found myself at some point feeling like I was going through almost like the stages of grief. Of being angry one day and being sad the next day, wanting to barter the day after that. And I remember when I got to the angry stage, I stayed angry for a long time, especially during the summer. Where, like you said, it was back to back to back. The content was everywhere. And at that particular time at my job, I was the only African American person on our leadership team. And so I'll never forget this well-intended white lady who we had an okay professional relationship, but I didn't really interact with her too much. She asked me how I was doing one day, and that was around the time that like everybody was like, don't ask me why you're doing blah blah blah. But she'd asked me how I was doing, and I think that was after George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and all of that. And I remember I just lost it on the Zoom that particular day of just like, do you really want to know? Like, I am angry, I am pissed off, I am sad, like angry of all the things that are happening, angry that we're sitting here and we're having this conversation, but yet we're not having the conversation, if that makes sense. Like, we were talking amongst each other as a leadership team, but we were a department of 200 people and we had not said a word to our department of 200 people, but yet the five of us as the senior leadership team can sit here and chat. And I remember thinking, I was like, this is BS. That we, as the five of us, can sit here and have this conversation. We've said nothing to our community. And I remember thinking, I was like, F all of y'all, I'm getting off this computer, I'm not coming back. Because I was like, it just does not make sense.
Yeah.
It just does not make sense.
And I will say, like, there was a point in time when we did figure out how to hang out and how to be social with other people. Yeah. And when I will, like, just on another note, when we did figure out there is a way to still be social, I mean, we were social. I remember the first time that me and my best friend sat 6 feet apart. We sat 6 feet apart late in the yard drinking her favorite wine, and it was like the best thing in the world had happened. It's just like we get to have these like nuances and parts of what we had before. Like we learn how to honor and value social time, and like learn how to honor and value the people that we had around us. I'll say like when we finally were able to figure out how to do it and not be worried as though people were going to, because people also have to understand that I don't know if people will look back in history and understand that for the first little while when COVID happened, there was this kind of thing that if someone got COVID, you didn't know if they were going to die. Yeah. There was like this time period where like there was it's not a direct correlation, right? But there was this time period where COVID was like slightly synonymous with dying.
Yeah. Or we shunned people, because I remember like saying at staff meetings, like, such and such has COVID, and it's like,
right,
they were not being clean, they were out in the street.
Yes.
And I remember kind of shunning people, because I remember at one point I was like, well, why are we sharing these diagnoses? Like,
right.
Is it really crucial to share that someone has COVID? Because then we begin to think of them differently. Yeah.
And then at school, why are we telling people who has COVID who's not? They're out. Everyone knows why they're out. There's work to do. Let's keep moving at some point in time. But yeah. So, but it was very interesting. Like for me, the doom and gloom portion, like honestly, it was weird to go back to school. But when we went back to school, the doom and gloom started to die. And then the more we went to school, the more like wrapped up in work. But the more we went to school, the more the doom and gloom went away. The more we were able to understand. So yeah.
Yeah, totally.
But I would also say during the 2-3 year period, through all of that, it caused me to really take a interpersonal look at myself to see what do I need to do, because I think similar to everybody else, I hit that wall during the pandemic, and at one point I remember saying, what the fuck am I doing? Like, what am I doing? And I remember that was also the time that I said at my current job, I don't want to do this anymore. And I remember that day I told my supervisor that I was like, I don't want to do this anymore. You can write me up, you can discipline me in whatever way you want to, but I don't want to do this anymore. And I'm just giving you the courtesy to let you know I'm checked out. Like, all the way checked out.
It's so interesting to have been like forced into that reflective period for such a long time. Because like even not just LaDarius, but I feel like most of the people I'm close to, we came out of that reflective time a little bit different. A little different, like centered about life. Like I remember coming out of the pandemic think after a while I was like, okay, I think I know what's important now. I think I have had some time to think about what matters and what does not matter. Like even down to like me and LaDarius. So one of the reasons that we were separate many, many years because we didn't live in the same place. I was able to come out of the pandemic and a year later understanding, well, that is not important. We will fix that. And that's how our relationship kind of blossomed back to what it was, and we were able to, we are where we are. So I was able like to come out of the pandemic, like in that respect and many others, knowing what was important after that like forced reflection time period, and even now in that this forced identity development. I love that you used the word grief, because that was a great way to describe like there were certain parts of being a black man or what I thought people believed about black men in my world that we had to grieve and we had to move past and understand different realities about. And even being a queer black man at that, there are certain portions of that and perceptions. There are parts of that life to grieve and know that and understand differently, if that makes sense.
No, I agree, and especially I think the grief piece was really astronomical in helping me get to that place of self-development, because during all of the shootings and everything, there was a period of time I was afraid to go outside because I knew the particular neighborhood I lived in Richmond at the time that it was very white. It was very gentrified, and so they were pushing out a lot of people of color. And I remember walking to the store one day, and I remember I had on like my mask and I had my hoodie up, and I was just trying to be incognito with these big sunglasses. And then it clicked to me that I was like, because I saw a white lady come out of her house and stare, and then turn right back around. And it was one of those moments that I was like, wow, this is still a thing. And I now put myself in this position because I had my hoodie up, I had big sunglasses on, and a big black mask. And I was like, now I have become a threat. And it was that moment that I was like, well, fuck it all. Like, if I'm still going to be perceived this way during a global pandemic, then I give up. Like, there's no way to win. But luckily I didn't give up on myself because I was like, things have to be better. Like, there has to be something better on the other side. And that was around the time that I was like, I have to do this work on myself because I was... The gloom and doom came back in a different way, and it felt like if I didn't take the time to invest in myself at the time, I didn't know what my future was going to look like. And I found that to be the most terrifying thing ever because here I was, someone who had planned out my entire career goals and life prior to the pandemic. You know, I was going to get this doctor, I was going to move on and do all of these other things, and then everything fell. And so at that time I was like, well, you either live in the sorrow and deal with it, or you pull your britches up and get your shit together and figure out what it is that you need to do. And I knew a big part of that was stepping away from my job. Because I was like, I had been doing this for so long, and they had really used and abused this during the pandemic because it wasn't, everybody above me was getting raises and all these other perks and working from home while, we were still being forced to show up on campus. And so I knew a big part of that was I have to leave this job. I have to because for my health. And that also forced me at that time to get a counselor and be intentional about what my counselor was going to be. And at that time, trying to find a black male therapist was the rarest thing you could come across. But it took me 6 months, but I managed to find somebody. And I think that was probably the best decision that I could have done for myself because I started to do the work of healing and processing and really understanding who I am. And it was funny, speaking of us getting together at that time, I saw a spiritual healer, a Reiki healer who had talked to me about all of these things and talked to me about my chakras and how my heart was blocked and how my throat was blocked. And she was like, it's from your career. She was like, it's from the work that you do. And this was through a Zoom session. So I was like, if this lady in New Jersey can fill this through a 30-minute Zoom session, then I've got to do better.
And also people don't understand, because clearly by the last 40 minutes, we care about our jobs a lot. And they're a big part of who we are. When being an educator is such a big part of who you are, people don't understand what a challenge it is to walk away from your job and to say to walk away from this position, as an educator, this position, this role is not doing me justice. It's not good for me. Because at the end of the day, when you're an educator, you are always fighting the good fight. There is always going to be a feel-good part there. There's always going to be more to give. So people don't understand the work it takes to walk away from that portion of your identity. Right? And people don't understand what it's like to do that and not feel like you've stopped fighting the good fight. Or to walk away and not feel like you've given up on changing the world or making schools better for people. People don't it's not like going from one accounting firm to another one. Not to denigrate anyone who does that or if it's hard to change jobs there, but walking away from your job as an educator is walking away from a lot of people. Is sometimes it can feel like walking away from change and do-goodership, which is not easy at all. It takes a lot of courage to be able to do that. So that's all right. That's what you made me said.
No, and I think you made a very good point when you said part of being an educator is fighting the good fight. And I think what made me realize I needed to step away was when it was time to fight for myself. I didn't know how to do it. And that was the part that it hit me like a ton of bricks that I was like, damn. well, I can go over here and advocate for this chapter, I can advocate for this student, but if it comes to advocating for myself, I have no earthly clue of how to do that. So that was one of the other reasons I was like, I gotta get away. Because if I don't take the time to invest in myself, I'm just gonna be this person who sits at this desk for the next 10 years miserable, and then that's not the kind of life that I want to lead.
And those people exist.
And
we work with those people.
We work with them all the time.
Yeah.
We work with them all the time.
Oh, yes.
And so I was like, I can't. We're too talented and too blessed to just sit here and deal with it.
Well, thank you both so much. As I want to respect and honor you both in your time, I'm just going to follow up with one last question.
Absolutely.
Is there anything else that you would like to share with us?
Anything else?
An experience, a story, anything.
I mean, I would say for me, as challenging as the pandemic was, I will say that not the pandemic itself, but the pause that it gave us, I found to be beneficial in so many different ways. Finished that dissertation and became the first person in my family to ever have a doctorate.
That's awesome.
Even though my little cousins think I work at a hospital, and I'm like, that's not the kind of doctor. But it's okay. We're going to educate you as we get there. But through that pause, I also took some time to do the work on myself. And I think if I had not have done the work on myself, I would not be in the space and position that I am now to be married to the love of my life. And so that was something that I knew the first time we met in our little date at the Harvey B. Gantt Center in 2015.
It was different then in
2015. But coming out of that made me realize that I need to stop waiting on the things that I want to happen and actually do the work to get there. And so oftentimes when I think of the pandemic, I think I've pushed all of the horror stories back in my head, and I think of the positive pieces that comes out, especially as I get to look at this beautiful human every single day. So.
I agree 100%. As there were such terrible parts on the other side of that, on the other side of the development and the reflection came some really, really good things. Like he said, I think he said space and position. I don't think I'd be in the position or space that I'm in if I didn't have to sit in that time and do some of that work and reflect and build and maintain and build relationships differently. Like for me, I always say I had to learn what really mattered and what was important. And I had to learn I've always had people around me, but I had to learn what it was. I had to learn how to have relationships differently on purpose. And I came out of the pandemic being able to do that, whether it's friendships, my family, having a wonderful husband. I do think honestly, we can that is one of the reasons we're together today too, is because I had to have that reflection time and grow in that way. And I think it's part of the reason we're together and our lives get to advance the way they do, and we get to enjoy what life is now in a different way than I think we would have enjoyed what life was before, to be honest. So
Well, thank you both so very much for your time today and for your authenticity and for both of you just sharing a part of yourselves with the Living Archives. We really appreciate it.
Well,
thank you.
We really appreciate you both. As educators, you don't hear it a lot, but thank you.
Thank you.
For all that you do, for all the lives that you impact on a daily basis. Thank you for your sacrifice. Thank you.
Thank you.